Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank, coming to you virtually from Seattle, the PNW. And today we've once again crossed the Canadian border. No traffic. We just sailed right through. We're into Regina, Saskatchewan. More about that in a minute. Listen, if you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, this right here is the podcast for you, the podcast of record. It's where the street smarts and book smarts collide. Hello, I'm Dan Whedon, and my co-host today is Phil Simchich, north of the border. Our guest today, we're very excited to have Gary Furr here. Gary is the founder of Gary Furr Consulting. He's out of Portland, Oregon. We're going to get to learn about him. He's an expert on helping small and medium-sized businesses to increase both top-line revenue and improve bottom-line profits. Everybody should be very excited to learn more about Gary and his practice. Welcome, Gary. We're going to be with you in just a minute. Listen, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts: iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, YouTube. As I like to say, we are ubiquitous. We come to you from not only Seattle, but about a dozen other cities, including the mothership in Atlanta, Charleston, Boston, Boca Raton, and a couple new ones in Columbus and Knoxville. Now, listen, before we bring on Gary to learn more about him, Phil, how's everything north of the border?
Dan, we're doing great here, and we're looking forward to coming and visit you one of these days once we all get our official vaccine passports.
Now, listen, we can go see you. Are we able to get back into the United States? That's my wonder.
Well, you'll be good. You'll be good.
Okay. Hey, listen, I have a question for you, Phil. You've heard the axiom, mother knows best, right? Have you heard that?
You bet. And I had a few of those lessons growing up.
Yes. Well, so did I, especially because I had a Latina, a Hispanic mother. So believe me, I learned all those. Well, there's a fun story that came out here in local Seattle land when all-pro safety Jamal Adams just signed an extension to his contract. It's about $40 million or so, or $70 million, a few million here or there, over 4 years. And there had been back and forth in the negotiations about guaranteed money and new money and all of that. Well, he's finally signed, and he held a press conference, and he admitted that his mother had called him the night before and basically said to him, sign the contract, take the offer. And he said, when she referred to him by his full name, he knew she was serious. So I can only imagine that he called his agents and said, hey guys, my mom told me I got to sign the contract. So we're signing the contract. Now, the funny thing is, well, not the funny, his dad played professional football and actually had a career-ending injury. So I'm sure his mother, who went through that as a wife, went to him and said, look, son, here's what you're doing. So, that's what I was asking. Any thoughts on either mom's wisdom or the thought about some guaranteed money for your future?
Sure, you bet. Well, first of all, every powerful person does have a superpower in charge of them, him or her. So that's important to know. When we owned our family business, Clear Lake Lodge, my mom was in charge, and from her I learned about really good customer service, which still applies to this day, regardless of internet and all that stuff. It's good old-fashioned customer service. The most important piece of advice my mom gave me when I was growing up, though, was don't chase the pretty girls. Everyone's chasing the pretty girls. So that's when I figured out to chase the smart girls. It turns out that some of the smart girls were pretty too, but most guys were too scared to talk to the smart girls, right? So thanks, Mom. That strategy really worked out.
Well, it's funny. We're talking about smart girls and pretty girls and all of that. We don't have either a smart or pretty girl with us, but we do have Gary Furr with us today, and we're really happy. Gary, listen, if some of the CEOs and presidents that you work with, they all have moms, and since mom knows best, would they, if would the smart or savvy mom, what would they say about banking relationships, financial statements, and running a business? What kind of advice would they give?
Well, my mom was a great cook. She wasn't a very good business manager, and her business she started failed. So I think the advice that my mom would give is to learn the language of business.
Mm.
And like great cooks learn the language of cooking, which is teaspoons and tablespoons and cups and measure and any kind of measurement, pinches and those kind of things. That's the language of cooking. To learn the language of business, you need to learn about P&L, profit and loss statements, balance sheets, cash flow projections, and learn how to use metrics to measure your progress and performance of your business. If you don't know the language of business, which is essentially accounting, you're probably not going to do very well. Just like if you don't know the language of cooking, you're not going to be a very good cook.
So speaking of an accounting, I am one and was one. So in addition to the accounting numbers, Gary, what other numbers are critical for businesses to focus on? And you specialize in turnarounds, especially. So when you walk into a turnaround situation, what numbers are you either looking for or are you having the team create for you right away so you can get control?
Well, typically when I go into a business is because they are struggling. So, the first thing you have to do is stop the bleeding. So where are they leaking cash out of that business? Because they're always leaking cash. They just don't know where it is. And you have to start looking for it. And that's usually a line out item analysis of where they're spending money and a comparison to how they've done in the past. Oftentimes I like to compare uh, their current year to their very best year they ever had and do a line item analysis and say, so for example, what are your cost of goods as a percentage of revenue in your very best year you ever had? And what are they now? And typically most business owners haven't done any kind of comparison. So they really have no clue. So they gradually, it's like, that proverbial frog in the water, right? They gradually is beginning worse and worse and worse, and they don't realize it because they're not paying that close of attention to it. So, doing line item analysis and then doing metrics, as percent of revenue, percent of gross profit, that helps really see where the money is going.
What I find interesting about what you just said, Gary, is, I think, comparisons people have always, well, I think mostly looked at comparisons, but they're looking at maybe the last couple of years. I love the idea of looking at your best year ever. Do you ever hear from people saying, well, that was our best year ever because of this thing, this event happened or something like that? How do you get that mindset to be, well, regardless of why it was your best year, we should be using that as a gauge?
Yeah, because they did something right in that year where they did really well, right? So let's figure out what you did right. And if you start doing that line item analysis, you can actually start figuring out where they did well and what didn't go well. If you start laying out the past years as well, you can actually see the progression of how they got to where they're at. And I always like to say that you should be laying these years out every year and looking at them and then create a trend line and follow the trend line, because the trend line can be your friend and you can see things happening in real time rather than waiting to the end of the year and saying, oh, crap, what happened? You do it on a regular weekly, monthly basis.
So Gary, when you're in a turnaround and once you've got your hands around the numbers, cash flow, being a non-accounting reality, and accounting numbers, and then other operating numbers, the other side of the coin that I believe is your sweet spot is people and leadership and accountability. So when you're in a typical turnaround situation, what are the most common problems that you end up solving quickly?
Getting everybody on the same page, head in the same direction. Because like I describe it as, it's like a train, it's moving, right? and we want to get the right people on the train. And I will help anybody who wants to get on the train, get on the train. But if they're going to kick and scream, I'm going to boot them off the train, because we need people who want to be on that train. And people, we can't do it without good people, right? We just can't do it. So people is probably the one of the most critical pieces, is that you have to have the right people. And to coin Jim Collins' phrase, you got to get them in the right seat on the bus. And typically what I do is I interview everybody in the organization, and I interview some of the average workers as well, to find out what's really going on, because ownership always doesn't tell you what's really going on, and often doesn't know what's really going on. And you really find out what's going on. And then when you start making changes, that's when people get really uncomfortable. They don't like change. And so you have to have clear direction. This is where we're at. This is where we're going. Here's how we're going to bridge the gap to get us there. Who wants to be part of that?
And so you're using communication constantly with your team, because I understand when you're in there, you're in control. So you are quasi CEO. You're the CEO of this organization for all intents and purposes, correct? So just quickly, how do you use communication? What's the communication frequency, style, content, etc. process?
Well, after I do my initial assessment and I've interviewed everybody, I pull everybody together and I said, this is what I've discovered. This is what we need to do to make the sharp right turn, to turn this business in the right direction. Here's how I want to do it. Here's how we're going to proceed. I'd like all of you to be a part of it. You're welcome to join me in the journey. If you don't want to be part of the journey, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's your choice, but this is where we're going. And I do that up front. I communicate the realities. I let them know the rules, because there's, anytime you play a game, you want to win, and you got to have rules. I lay down the rules. This is how we're going to function. And then I meet every Monday with that staff, and we do an update on where we're at on the path, and where we're headed, and remind them of where we're headed.
Hey, Gary, I'm curious, as I listen to your skills, and I've known you now for quite a while, and I listen to your skills and your expertise, and it revolves around communication. And I got to believe there's some psychology involved in how you're dealing with this, and obviously the smarts around metrics. How'd you get here? Tell me a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. Where did this start, and how did this journey go for you?
Well, I think it started with my mom owning her own business, and I had to work in the business as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, and that business. I watched that business fail. I watched my mom struggle to pay her bills, and spending nights crying and just upset over how the business was running. And at that time, I kind of thought, gosh, why is this so hard? There's a lot of successful businesses around. Why is this so hard? And then I went to college, and I got out of college, and I went to work for a company, and I worked there for a year, and then I ended up taking over as operations officer for that company. It was a $5 million company, and I was 24 years old. I had to learn quickly. I had to get up to speed quickly. And then I did that, and then I started my own business. So I learned from how to start a business from scratch and grow it to $1 million. And then I left that business because the last company I'd worked for had come and asked me if I would come work for them and get their business straightened out. And I worked for that company for 22 years as operations officer. And we grew from 16 million to 40 million while I was there in 7 locations. And so the difficulty of managing multiple locations, and as operations officer, everybody reported to me, every single department, the finance department, the marketing department, the sales department. So I learned a lot about every single aspect of the business and how each aspect is like a link in a chain. So while I was there, I started to get bored. And so I went, because after a while it gets easy. So I went back to school to get my MBA in organizational development. And then in 2012, I was coming back from a trip to Russia. I'd been there for 8 days. It took me 29 hours to get home. And on that flight home, I decided that I didn't want to do this anymore. I was supposed to go to China in the fall. I'd just been to China recently on business. And I'm like, I really don't want to do this anymore. So I left in 2012 in the fall. I started this business. Actually, I thought I might retire. That lasted a couple of weeks, and I realized that I'm not good at sitting around. I have to have something to do. My house was clean, the yard was immaculate, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, shit, now what? So I panicked. So I decided to start this business, to take my years as operations officer and business experience and my MBA and couple it with helping other businesses that want to grow and increase top line revenue and maximize bottom line profit. It's all about making money. I realize that people love to do what they do, but the goal has to be to make money. Because if you're not making money, you're not going to be in business. You don't serve your employees. You don't serve your customers. You have to be making a profit in order to help everybody.
Is that the problem with a lot of privately held small, medium businesses? They're really lifestyle businesses instead of dividend machines like big corporate public quarterly reporting companies?
I would totally agree. They think small. Their small business makes them small-minded. They don't think like a big corporation. They do things by the seat of their pants. They don't pay close enough to their financials. Often they don't know if they're making money or not. They think net profit is cash when it's not cash. And the biggest thing I've seen as businesses grow, they get into this tax avoidance mode where they want to avoid paying tax. And in the process, they don't create any wealth in their business. And so then they go to the bank and they want to borrow money. And the bank's like, turns to the second page of the balance sheet and looks at the retained earnings and said, there isn't any. I can't loan you money. Or if they decide they want to sell their mom and pop business or their small business, no one can buy it because they haven't been making any money. So tax avoidance is a short-term strategy with a long-term negative effect. And as Phil would say, since he's the SME wealth builder, we should be building wealth in our business.
Well,
You
Gary,
have to think more like a bigger company, bigger corporation.
yeah. Well, Gary, you're going to appreciate what I'm about to say next. We have to pay our bills, not paying taxes. We're paying our bills right now. We're going to take a short break to hear from today's spotlight sponsor. And when we come back with our guest, Gary Furr, for our Hot or Not section of the show, we're going to find out about banking and lines of credit. So don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Would you like to grow your business, increase revenue, and raise profits? Would more financing from your banker help you grow? Who is guiding your succession plan? Would you like more control over your business so you can sleep better at night? SME Business Wealth Builder works with business leaders and owners like you to help them grow their business and build their business wealth. For more information and to check out free resources, go to smewealthbuilder.com.
All right, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and the brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm Phil Simchich, and our guest today is Gary Furr with Gary Furr Consulting. And for our next segment, Hot or Not.
Well, Gary, we're about to turn up the heat in the kitchen. I know that your mom cooked. I know you cook. We may talk about that later, but Phil and I are going to pepper you with questions about business, about life, maybe even about cooking or being a pilot. You never know. And at the end, after you answer, you win absolutely nothing. So, you just started talking about banking and bankers, and we're going to probably spend a little more time talking about that. But hot or not, Gary, a business line of credit?
Hot. I think it's important.
Why would you say that? And how should companies start looking at that if they don't have one?
A business line of credit is there to help you even out the highs and the lows in your business, typically with accounts receivable that you may have out for 30, 60 days, and you've got to keep paying your bills. And that will allow, a line of credit allows you to keep paying those bills or to pay payroll while you're waiting for revenue to come in. So I think every business should probably have a line of credit with their bank, which requires you to have a good relationship with your bank, which requires you to produce proper financials. But also every business should have a cash reserve. I prefer 3 to 6 months cash reserve in your business in case of emergency. No different than our personal lives. You know, we have to have an emergency fund, something to fall back on. Businesses need one too.
So Gary, being proactive with your banker, hot or not?
I'm sorry?
Being proactive with your banker and treating your banker, not grinding them for interest rates, but treating them like a valuable strategic partner and sharing ideas and calling them up and discussing ideas beforehand and things like that. So being proactive with your banker, hot or not?
Very hot. And you hit it right on the nail on the head, is make them a strategic partner with your business. Your banker wants you to be successful. They want to help you. If they've lent you money, their name's on the line there. So they want to help you be successful. And so being proactive and engaging them with them and communicating them when things are good, not waiting for times to be bad to call up your banker. I'm always amazed when I interact with business owners and I ask them, I said, who's your banker? Well, so-and-so. When was the last time you talked to him? Oh, I haven't talked to him in a long time. That's not a good strategy. You need to be communicating with your banker on a regular basis while business is good. Too often business owners wait for business to get struggle or to have problems to communicate with their banker. And then it's really too late. Or the worse yet, they hunker down and hide and don't respond to the banker. That's even worse. But having a healthy, proactive, engaging relationship with your banker will benefit your business.
I want to stay on the banker theme because you wrote a book, How to Make Your Banker Happy. I think I got the name correct, Gary. How to Make Your Banker Happy. And, you know, I think anybody in the small business, especially, and maybe even the micro small, people who may only have less than 5 employees, don't even think about their banker. They may not know who their relationship manager is. But I know that even in my case, and we talked about this when we had Rick Darrow from Liberty Bank on, me knowing them personally helped with the PPP loan. You actually knew who to talk to, and it didn't take an introduction to go through that. So for the small business owners and maybe even the solopreneurs we have out there, what are some strategies? I mean, yes, you can probably walk in the door maybe today. I don't know, walk in the door, but what are some ways that you can make sure that that relationship with the relationship banker is kept strong?
Go to meet your community bankers. I would advise all small businesses not to discredit the big banks, but to go meet your community banker. The problem with the big banks is they're on a continual rotational basis with their staff. So you may have established a relationship with a banker in one of the big banks, and you go back 3 months, 6 months later, and they're gone. They've been promoted somewhere else. Whereas the community banks, often those individuals have been there for many years. I think the average tenure of the bankers I interviewed at the banks was 14 to 15 years. They'd been at their community banks. They get involved in the community. They tend to know you when you walk in the door. It's a much healthier relationship to deal with a local community bank that you can establish that relationship and you know the person will be there.
Gary, you talked about knowing your numbers and accounting. So a lot of business people will start off, and especially if it's like a partnership or something, and one of them ends up doing the numbers. So is it hot or not to get professionals involved with your company, even when you're small? So we're talking accountant, lawyer, consultants, things like that. Hot or not are consultants?
Hot, absolutely necessary. I would encourage, you don't have to have a full-time on-staff accountant to work for you, just like you don't need a full-time on-staff attorney. But you need to engage professional people to help you in those areas of expertise that you probably do not have. I mean, most business owners have never gone to school to be an accountant or a bookkeeper or a CPA or an attorney or an insurance agent. None of them. You need professionals in those spaces to help your business, no different than your banker. They should be part of the advisory team. Your banker, your attorney, your CPA, your insurance agent, all should be part of your advisory team. And you're only buying a small piece of their time, so that it's not terribly expensive.
So Gary, I know that we have listening people who might even be wanting to become an entrepreneur. That's why they're listening to the podcast, right? They may not be able to easily go in and get money from a bank to start. And not only that, we've seen during the pandemic, a lot of people don't want to go back to their jobs. They're creating something. So hot or
Yeah.
not, a second mortgage to start your business.
Oh, that's a tough question.
I told you we were going to get a couple tough ones in there for you.
I think there's a question to ask before you get to that. And it comes down to how I define strategy. And strategy to me is to find a need, fill the need, and then collect a check, and don't screw it up in the middle. The first step is to find a need. You, as a business owner and entrepreneur, you better find the need first. Many entrepreneurs fail because they come up with a really great idea. Oh, I'm going to make this new found glass cup or something like that. And they go to their family and friends and say, hey, what do you think of this? And their family and friends love them and say, oh, you should really do that. But they have never gone out and beta test the market to find out if that is a real need. So before you mortgage the house for a second mortgage, you better test market your idea to make sure there is really a need for that idea.
Hey, can you, Phil, really quickly, can you go through those three again and said, don't mess it up in the middle? First was find a need. I know the last one was collect money. What was the middle one?
Fill the need.
Fill the need. Okay.
That's operations, right?
Right.
You find the need, which I describe as, I'm working with a company right now, and I say, the important things to find the need. That's the sales department, the marketing department, find the need. That's their job. Operationally, the rest of the organization is to fill that need, right? And fill it in the most efficient, effective way possible. And then that way the accounting department can collect a check. Don't mess it up in the middle. And everybody messes it up in the middle. It's business is, my first book was It's Not Hard, It's Business. It doesn't have to be as hard as we make it.
Gary, you talked about, obviously, don't mess it up in the middle. And I know that you, as really the quasi-CEO in a turnaround organization, spent time on the frontline operations riding a tractor. So hot or not for the CEO to spend time on the front lines?
Absolutely hot, really hot. You got to get out and see what's happening. I have this phrase I like to use. It's a go and see. So I was working with a manufacturer one time, and he was telling me that the week he was gone, that nothing got shipped. And he was up in his office, and I was sitting there. I said, why not? He said, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? He said, I don't know why. We didn't ship anything. So I got up on his whiteboard and I wrote, go and see. Go and see what's going on. Get down and dirty. I happened to be working with an agricultural firm, and I went out to see how they were planting their plants. And to be honest, I was shocked. And he said, yeah, it's most people's reaction. They're shocked. I said, so let me see if I can figure this out. So I actually got up on the tractor, the planting machine, and I rearranged how they were doing it to make it more efficient on how they were planting. And he's like, I never thought of that. I see it from a different perspective, right? A different set of eyes. That's why having an advisor from outside is so critical to your success, is they see it with a different set of lenses, different experiences.
Gary, what are some of the contributing factors to messing it up in the middle? Because I can imagine, businesses getting started, and the founder who becomes the CEO or the president is very hands-on maybe, and there's a quality control aspect, and then they start growing because they're doing it well. And then you said people mess it up in the middle. Is it rapid growth too fast? Is it employees? Is it transition from being the founder to a CEO? Maybe all of those. What are some of the factors that go to messing it up in the middle?
All of the above. Companies that are growing rapidly, or companies that have been in business for a long time, never actually take the time to step back and look at their business from a 30,000-foot view to really see what's going on. And when you're in it and you're in the weeds, you can't see it. So it's critical as an owner or CEO to be able to step back and look at how the business is running. And oftentimes you're going to see that it doesn't flow, that operationally to fill that need, you're not having efficient flow. So you have bottlenecks, you have constraints. And I describe it as like, a river. What happens to a river when it winds? It slows down, right? As opposed to like the Columbia River, which I live close by, it's a pretty straight line. It goes really fast because I've been out in it windsurfing, and it goes really fast. So we want to create flow, linear flow. And how do we do that? And you can't do it if you're not stepping back and looking at it and asking the hard questions. Is there a reason why we do this way? And then looking for constraints within the process, within that flow. And as like I was telling a young manager the other day, I said, you just saw how to fix a constraint within this process. Don't think that you're done. Because just because you fix one constraint, it's going to have an upstream and a downstream effect. And we need to look for the next constraint. So we have to constantly be looking for these bottlenecks or these constraints that impede flow, and then work at fixing them on a continual basis. Yeah, you get the big ones first, and then they get smaller and smaller, but then you become very efficient at producing whatever it is you're producing. That's, filling the need.
Gary, thank you for that great answer. We got to fill one more need. We're going to take a short break to hear from our corporate sponsors. And when we come back with Gary Furr for our famous Plead the Fifth section of the show, I'm going to see if I can actually scare Gary a little bit. Let's see if we can make Gary a little bit nervous. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors: Ideal Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, and the Kitsap Sun newspaper. Please visit our website at www.shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle to learn more about these terrific companies. Now back to the show.
All right, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and the brightest CEOs and thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area. I'm co-host Phil Simchich, and today our guest is Gary Furr. And for our next segment, Plead the Fifth.
Gary, Plead the Fifth, very similar to Hot or Not, but we're going to start throwing some curveballs maybe here to see if we can get you to swing and miss on a couple. You can plead the fifth once, but I've never known Gary to shy away from a question. So, Gary, I mentioned briefly that you are a pilot. You've piloted planes. You've flown solo. You've done a whole lot of things up in the air. So plead the fifth, Gary. What is the most scared you've ever been piloting a plane?
Oh, that's an easy one. I was in the Columbia Gorge, coming back from. We had a location in Eastern Oregon. We had 7 locations, and part of getting around to them, I used to fly a private plane. And coming back from the Eastern Oregon, I was in the gorge, and the weather started to close in. And coming home as a pilot, you have this urge to get home. Sometimes the urge is too strong, and you need to not pay attention to that urge. Well, as the weather closed down, I turned around to go back, realizing I was not going to be able to get through the gorge. But as I turned back, the weather had closed in behind me as well. And so I was in a pretty bad predicament. But luckily, I knew that there was a little teeny airport at a place called Cascade Locks on the Columbia River. And I swung around, and I had 2 people with me, which is really bad. When you take other people's lives in your hands, you got to be cognizant of what you're doing. I skimmed over the top of those trees and under the clouds and landed at that airport. And I was literally shaking when I landed, because that was the closest I'd ever come to crashing that airplane, and it was close. That's the scariest I've ever had. I did that one more time, and I swear from then on I was going to be a fair weather pilot. I was not flying in marginal weather anymore. And I stopped. I said, that's it. If the sky's blue, great. If there's clouds, forget it.
All right, so speaking of fair weather pilot, what's the key activity for you as a pilot to keep the plane on course, and what's the business lesson there?
You know, every airplane has lots of instruments on the dash, and those dash instruments are critical to your flight success and your survival in your life, because it's not like you can pull over to the side of the road, right? So you have to pay attention to the instruments on the dash. It's no different in your business. Your dashboard of your business are the P&L, the balance sheet, the cash flow projection. Those are instruments on the dash of your business that you have to be paying attention to in order to survive as a business owner. And just like flying an airplane, if I wasn't paying attention to the instruments, it can be deadly. It can be deadly in your business. One of the analogies I always like to use is when you fly the airplane and you turn the yoke, that's like a steering wheel. You turn the yoke to go a new direction. If you don't keep pressure on the yoke, the airplane will, if you let go of, the airplane will spin back and go the direction it was going out of momentum. It's the same in business. If I'm not there to keep pressure on that business, the business will tend to go back to the direction it was going because of habit, and people like their comfort zone. So one of the things that I do when I work with companies is I keep that pressure on that yoke. I don't let the airplane or the business spin back to its original direction.
So Gary, I'm going to put you in Doc Brown's DeLorean. We're going to go back in time. I'm going to take you back to 10-year-old Gary Furr. I don't know where you were or what year it was, but what advice, you run into 10-year-old Gary Furr riding his bike somewhere. What advice would you give that young Gary Furr without messing up the time continuum, right? But what advice would you give Gary Furr?
Don't be such a rebel. Don't buck the system. I got arrested when I was 12 years old. So don't do things that will get you arrested. I remember when I was 10 and my mother owned this business, and we lived in the mountain community. She owned a bakery, and I had to go down at 5 a.m. and wash pans before the school. And I would catch the school bus out in front. And I had to go down this trail through the forest. And I knew there was something waiting for me in that forest. And I would run like a bat out of hell down this trail so that whatever was waiting for me wouldn't get me. And as I got older, I realized that, really the key is we have to face our fears. Our fears are usually not founded. And that fear was not founded. And I could have walked leisurely down that path and nothing would have ever happened. We have to learn to face our fears in terms of anything in life, anything we do.
So Gary, you're a bit of a Renaissance gentleman. You're a chef, pilot, windsurfer formerly. In 10 years, what hobby or sport would you be doing in 10 years, do you think, that you're not doing today?
Oh, I'd love to be kiteboarding. Is what I really love to be doing, is kiteboarding. But unfortunately, I busted so many body parts windsurfing and jumping off the ledges in my inline skates. I don't think that's going to be possible. I'm paying that price now. So what am I going to be doing in 10 years? I hope to be doing what I'm doing now, which is I love what I'm doing now. I absolutely love it. Someone asked me about this, if it's a job, and I said, no, it's not a job to me because I love doing it so much. It's so much fun. It's more of what my hobby is that learning and growing. I'm kind of I've got these 5 areas that I want to be the best me I can possibly be in: emotionally, physically, mentally, professionally, and spiritually. And working in those 5 areas in order to be a better person and a better me, so I can impart more wisdom and knowledge and experience to my clients. And to me, that's a growth curve that will never end until I'm gone. And so I want to be on that curve to constantly be learning and growing and provide guidance, if I can, to help other people and businesses to grow and earn more money, or to structurally get better so they don't struggle and die.
Hey, Gary, speaking of hobbies, we have a question we've been asking each of our guests for the year, and then we're going to compile them at the end. And so you're going to be no different. And I know you love what you're doing, but let's just pretend you had to start a new business, but we're telling you, Gary, you got to start a new business based on a hobby. What would that hobby be, and what new business would you start?
Wow, that's a hard question, Dan. A new hobby.
Not a new hobby. What hobby do you have that you like to do that if we said you got to start a new business based on that, what would it be?
I'd probably have to start selling books. I'm running out of room. I have bookshelves everywhere full of books. I would have to probably sell or get a bigger place.
There you go.
So I'd probably open a bookstore.
Isn't it Hudson's down there in Portland? Is it Hudson's bookstore?
Powell's.
Powell's. I don't know where Hudson's. You'd give Powell's bookstore in Portland
bookstore
a run
is
for their
an
money.
entire city block.
That's right.
With
I've been to
like
Powell's many times.
5 levels or 4 levels. Yeah.
Yep.
So you talked about your 5 keys for personal development. What do you recommend for business owners to enhance their professional development and business skills?
Learn new skills. Learn to be a better leader. Businesses rise and fall based on leadership. If you're not a good leader, if you're relying on leadership skills that you've learned 20, 30, 40 years ago, you're going to struggle because the environment has changed. People have changed. And, who is it? John Maxwell, who wrote his Law of the Lid, whatever. Yeah. In 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. The law of the lid is that our leadership people can only go to where our lid is. So if we're a 5, no one can ever rise above a 4. So we have to raise our leadership lid in order to raise our organizations to become more successful. And that requires us doing the hard work and learning how to become a better leader. I think leadership is the key, Phil, for
Gary,
organizations that want to grow and be better.
Oh, absolutely. There's so many opportunities and resources these days for people to become better leaders. And listening to your advice on this podcast will definitely be one of them. So Gary, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Shrimp Tank. For our listeners who want to get in touch with you and learn more about you and your company and your turnaround expertise and 5 ways to develop and top line and bottom line enhancement, how do they get more information from you? How do they reach you?
Yeah, you can go to my website. It's basically www.garyfurrconsulting.com. There's lots of free resources there. There's podcasts there. There's just tons of free stuff on there. Or you can buy my books.
Is it true you have a 208 question assessment on your website for free?
Yeah, you keep giving me grief on it. I'm narrowing it down. There's a free assessment on my website, and it is 208 questions to help you determine how well your business is doing.
Awesome. It's an instant MBA for people. Gary, thank you very much. Everyone, make sure you check out all the replays on shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle and wherever you get your podcasts from, such as iHeart, Apple, Google, or Spotify. Please follow us on our show's social media pages on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
Well, Gary, thanks for joining us. Look forward to seeing you in person again soon. Phil, thanks as always for jumping over the border and helping us out. Everybody listen, we have one minor change. Next week, we're coming to you on Tuesday due to a conflict that I have on Wednesday. So Michelle Baumberger is going to be my co-host, and we're going to be here on Tuesday, August 24th at noon Pacific time. Our guest is Elizabeth Harris from Resultus Consulting. I've known Elizabeth for years. She is a fractional chief revenue officer. So the talk about money will continue on next week with Elizabeth Harris and my guest, or my co-host, Michelle Baumberger. So please plan on joining us. Special day, Tuesday, August the 24th. In the meantime, please be safe, be well, and be prosperous, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp